Good afternoon and welcome. I am Mark Hansen, founding director of Interfaith at Augsburg, an institute to promote interreligious learning and leadership. Because Augsburg is rooted in the faith and values of the Lutheran Church, we have made enhancing interfaith leadership on campus and nationally a priority in Augsburg's current strategic plan. Our topic today, Neighbors Together in a Divided Nation and Interreligious Conversation, and our presenters reflect Augsburg's commitment to being a university and to creating neighborhoods and a society where religious diversity is a constructive force serving the common good. It is our hope that our conversation today will give you insights, courage, and hope in your varied context to continue this dialogue and the actions that come from it. If you have a question today, please submit it in the Q&A box. It's my honor to introduce Farhan Latif, president of the El-Hibri Family Foundation in Washington, D.C., who will moderate today's conversation. Mr. Latif and the El-Hibri Foundation lead national interfaith peacemaking work through grant making, capacity building, and training opportunities for organizations throughout the country. His work is inspired by democratic values and universal norms shared by faith traditions. Mr. Latif and his colleagues are challenging global extremism and ideologically motivated hate. Farhan, the important work you and your colleagues are doing is needed now more than ever. The El-Hibri Foundation was begun by Mr. and Mrs. Fuad and Nancy El-Hibri, parents of Augie Kareem El-Hibri, was at Augsburg 2006. We are grateful for their support of Augsburg over the years, and we're honored to have you, Farhan, moderate today's conversation. Welcome.
Thank you, Bishop Mark, for the kind introduction and for the transformational work that Augsburg University's Interfaith Initiative does, and welcome to all joining online today. Your focus on everyday experiences as a way of establishing common ground and understanding reminds us that it is indeed the little ordinary expressions of diversity that help us overcome obstacles of difference and discord. I live in Northern Virginia, 13 miles from DC, and on a good day, it takes me an hour and a half to get to the El-Hibri Foundation. On a street where I live, you will find all of America reflected in just 24 houses. We have people from a variety of ethnic and racial backgrounds with an equal diversity of careers on display. We have neighbors who work at the Department of Homeland Security and who serve in the armed forces, each of the armed forces. We're also a street that has seen its fair share of campaign signs of late, with the names of blue candidates side by side with the red ones, and with some who resist wearing their political hearts on their front yards. My street is an active one, and it's not a collection of isolated igloos. We know one another, we talk to one another, we visit each other, and we mow each other's lawns and bring each other's garbage cans in, and even children's toys if they're left in the street, as one of my child calls me right now while I'm on this panel. One of the kids set off the car alarm, and the neighbor was there to check on us. And in our recent new reality living under COVID, my children are quarantining in a bubble with our neighbors' children. We've become a neighborhood quarantining together. So whether with a yard sign or a bumper sticker or a subtle remark or a firm declaration, my neighbors and I all know one another's political, ideological, and religious affiliations. Needless to say, some of our views differ quite dramatically, sometimes even in polar opposite directions. But we're neighbors, and that's the greatest common denominator. Our shared little corner of Northern Virginia creates relationships that transcend difference, building mutual respect and community. And we will show up with cookies on Christmas for our next door neighbors, and they will bring us gifts on Eid. But we know that life on our street may not quite resemble the experiences of others in an America where division, not diversity, often prevails. Right now, our nation is confronting two major transformations. They say that in 20 years, we will become a majority-minority nation. And for those who fear the perceived loss of power, privilege, and position, this development is an existential threat. For them, the other becomes the enemy. And to this, the ever-increasing influence of social media, where distorted information fuels the fire of animosity and misunderstanding. The virtual world is also fertile ground for those who crave the sameness they see that's missing in the physical world. They trade in the richness of real neighborly relations for the shallowness of homogeneity on the internet. Here at the El-Hibri Foundation, we are blessed to know and uplift those who offer something else, the true power of being neighbors. We're proud to support the Sisterhood of Salam Shalom, founded 10 years ago with its 3,000 Muslim and Jewish women, fostering stronger local relationship, helping it grow from 6 to 150 chapters. The foundation also supports the Multi-Faith Neighbors Network, as it helps rabbis, pastors, and imams overcome suspicion and fear to build shared communities and connected congregations. And we support the Aspen Institute's Inclusive America Project, as it works with faith and civic leaders who bring their communities together at neighbors with the spirit of religious pluralism. These are just a few great initiatives happening across the country that are rebuilding our social fabric, and that gives us hope. We as Americans are in the midst of a particular moment in our nation's evolution. Today's program, Neighbors Together in a Divided Nation, an interreligious conversation, is both practical and pressing. We hope to dwell into our respective faith traditions to find inspiration and instruction on how being neighbors is not simply a religious imperative, but a formula to reset the country from its current inclination toward division. I want to thank our esteemed panelists, who I'll be introducing in detail as they present: Imam Makram El-Amin, Professor Laurie Brandt Hale, and Rabbi Arielle LeKach Rosenberg. We look forward to your wisdom from both the theological and experiential narratives on the role of the good neighbor, and we hope your insights provoke deep thought and action afterwards. There's a quote often attributed to Benjamin Franklin when asked whether America would be a republic or a monarchy, and Franklin replied, "A republic if you can keep it." Now, whether Franklin truly uttered those words has been the subject of some scrutiny as of late, so let's turn to an adage that we know indisputably he made. Be at war with your vices, at peace with your neighbors, and let every new year find you a better man. As we embark on 2021 and the promise it holds in store, let us consider Franklin's call to look inward, to curb our frailties, as well as next door, across the street, or elsewhere, to create that sense of community that comes from being good neighbors. Thank you. I'll now introduce our first panelist, Imam Makram El-Amin, who has worked for more than 2 decades as a religious and community leader, firmly rooted in the principles of our inherent human dignity. In addition to his weekly teaching duties, Imam El-Amin leads Al-Maun, Neighborly Needs, community outreach that addresses food insecurity, affordable housing, career services, and mentoring. A student of the late religious leader and scholar, Imam Morrisdeen Muhammad, he is a thoughtful and moderate leader and has approach to Islam that affords opportunities for Imam El-Amin to share the stage with Bishop Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama. He was a delegate to a historic interfaith event in Rome with Pope John Paul II, and a member of the Interfaith Clergy Delegation to the Holy Land. Please welcome my dear friend, Imam Makram El-Amin.
Thank you, Farhan. I appreciate that. I begin, as tradition for Muslims to begin, we say, with God's name, the merciful benefactor, the merciful redeemer. I'm honored to be here here at the Augsburg Forum with Reverend Mark Hansen and his colleagues there at Augsburg. I'm just completely grateful to be a part of this esteemed panel on such an important topic, neighbors together in a divided nation. As I think and I reflect on the Islamic tradition, I believe that it puts great emphasis on our obligations to our neighbors. It's great emphasis that is there, what our duty is to them and how we should be approaching this really sacred relationship. It's a sacred one. I'm called to a couple of the traditions of Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, and when he said to his companions in the community, he says, "You do not have faith if your neighbor is fearful of your hand or your tongue, something you might do to them, something you might say about them, be verbally abusive, etc." He said he equated this fear to not having faith. So put a great emphasis on the idea of how we interact. Good human interaction is really a matter of faith. And further, he said that, you do not have faith if you go to bed with your stomach full and your neighbor is hungry. The idea of really attending to the needs of those who are around us and being conscientious enough to say that I need to not only be concerned with myself, but also with how others are faring. And lastly, he talked about the neighbor as not just being the one immediately to your left or your right, but he talked about them as being 40 doors in any direction, So it was a very expansive way, a more communal way of seeing our neighbors, our neighborhoods, and so on. Now, we live in such a pluralistic society that if we walk 40 doors in any direction, that we're bound in this society to meet all kinds of people, different backgrounds, different religious traditions, different political ideologies, et cetera. So I think this saying really holds so much weight in my thinking, in my mind, and how we approach our relationships to one another. We're obligated to treat each other fairly. I think this comes true not only in Islam, but other traditions as I understand them as well. And this means with dignity, this means with fairness, this means with justice. But is it unity for the sake of unity? I say no to that. I think there's principles by which we are to build upon. I think there are things that we are to come together. It's not necessarily unconditional. The love of God is unconditional to us in many ways, but it also requires us to do things. It also requires of us to do things. And I think this sometimes is amiss from the conversation, that we have to do things. We have to be about something. We have to be action oriented in order to really solidify that unity. Otherwise, that quest for unity can actually be a form of oppression. So the basis of unity, I believe, is that of fairness and justice and equality. And we need to be able to have difficult conversations as part of what we would call civilized society. The fact that we can talk about things that we differ widely on, but yet do it in a way of coming to seek understanding, not disparaging one another, not castigating each other, not isolating one another, but one of building and one of really coming one as a unit in the sense that we want to have a shared values. God says to us in our text, he says, argue with them in ways that are best. Argue with them in ways that are best. So even my disagreement with those in different faith traditions, different ethnicities, different socioeconomic status, different just traditions, period, even though I differ with them, and we're maybe at polar opposites on an issue of the day, I also know that I must bring my argument. I must bring my position, bring my point of view in ways that are best, ways that build not ways to tear down. I think we see that in today's society to where, to disagree is to really be at odds with one another, and in some cases take up arms against one another. I think this is something that in the tradition of faith that we can, I think, civilize the discourse a great deal. I don't believe a narrative that necessarily that America is more divided today than it's ever been. I challenge that narrative, quite frankly. I think there are times when we've seen separate bathrooms and separate drinking fountains. And we've seen the denial of people to have good schools and education. So where even an issue like busing was such a controversy that people lost their lives over these kinds of things. Yes, it's in our face. Yes, it's more prevalent. And in fact, perhaps what we're seeing is a rise of the level of people being uncomfortable with the divide. But I think a divide has always been there for many, particularly African Americans and other minorities in this country. And I think this is something that as faith communities that we have to have the courage to say. And we have to have the courage to stand in this moment as well as choose to be on the right side of history. I believe that as we evolve and we grow to what's called value-based relationships that transcend our difference, transcend our religious tradition, transcend our uniquenesses or our particularities that we have in our own uniquenesses. And it really reaches across. It reaches across the aisles. It reaches across from the mosque to the temple to the church. It reaches across streets from one another. And it has us connect based on what we value most. So when I'm really trying to understand someone, I don't really ask them firstly about what their tradition is. I really and truly want to come to understand what they value, because I feel at that point in time, we can really come to come to know one another in a way that's authentic, in a way that is lasting. I think that times can change. I think that people can change. I know that our president, our newly elected President Biden, I know his policies from the 70s are not like they are today. I know he has evolved. I've seen it with my own eyes. I've seen this. Even just earlier today, he, with just stroke of a pen, looked to undo some of the systemic racism and institutional racism that has plagued communities for decades, for many decades. I believe that change is possible. It's not about can it happen. It's not about will it happen. It's about really, do we have the will to do it? It's a will to do is the question that is at hand. The future is possible. Whatever we want the future to be, it is absolutely possible. I believe that as people in faith communities, I think we have to lean in this moment. I think that we have to challenge the things that we're seeing that are not correct. I leave you with one last saying of Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam. He says, when you see a wrong, change it with your hands. If you're unable to do so, then dislike it in your hearts. And if you are not able to do even that, he said, change it with your tongue, your mouth. And if you're unable to do that, then at least dislike it in your heart, but know that that's the weakest of faith. So there's the hand, the tongue, the heart. I think there's a path forward. I look forward to hearing from my colleagues. Thank you. Peace be with you.
Thank you, Imam El-Amin. And if we could see the audience, I'm sure they're clapping right now in their living rooms. And thank you for injecting optimism to the challenges that lie ahead and putting that back on us to move forward. We will continue with our next panelist, Lori Brandt Hale, and she is a professor and chair of religion and philosophy at Augsburg University, where she has taught since 1998. She holds degrees from the University of Iowa, the University of Chicago Divinity School, and the University of Virginia. Hale has devoted her academic career both to teaching and to studying the life and legacy of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Please welcome Professor Laurie Hale. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I am profoundly moved by the invitation to participate in this conversation. In our current context, in our deeply divided nation, I have an overwhelming sense of responsibility to speak to this moment and about this moment, beginning with the ugly division within Christianity itself, underscored by what some are calling a Christian insurrection against the American government. Christian nationalism driven by white supremacy and xenophobia did not show up out of nowhere in Washington, D.C. on January 6th, 2021. In fact, white American Christianity is built on and rooted in a racist empire-building project that aligns with the white European story of Christian conquest and colonization and genocide, though these stories don't often make it into the sermons or the homilies or the history books of the people who most need to hear them. Over and over again, we, and there are all sorts of ways we could parse out this we, have failed to acknowledge this history and this reality, this blasphemy. And we, I'll be more specific this time, white Christians of all theological and political leanings have failed to repent and change our behavior and structures of oppression accordingly. But the images of pro-Trump domestic terrorists scaling the walls of the Capitol of the United States of America, carrying flags proclaiming Jesus saves and Jesus is my savior, Trump is my president, and wearing clothes emblazoned with Camp Auschwitz and 6MWE, 6 million weren't enough, a horrific anti-Semitic claim that the 6 million Jews murdered by the Nazis during the Holocaust weren't enough. These images demand our attention and our courage and our outrage. For me, these images demand my attention in this interreligious conversation, because the sensibilities and skills and resources necessary for naming and denouncing Christian nationalism are the same sensibilities, skills, and resources needed for engaging positive interreligious activity, for being neighbors together. And for me, these sensibilities and resources come from a number of places. Years of studying the life and theology of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, as well as years of teaching in the formative environment of the religion department at Augsburg with an increasingly diverse student body, and of thinking alongside my colleagues steeped in the Lutheran theological tradition about the importance of developing interreligious competency and what we mean by our Augsburg missional claim to be shaped by the faith and values of the Lutheran Church. These are things that have shaped my own thinking. So Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a theologian and a pastor, a Nazi resistor, and he was executed for his efforts to oppose Hitler. And it may go without saying, he lived at a time and in a place where the Christian Church, the Deutsche Kirche, was more interested in power and self-preservation than Jesus' call to care for the least of those among us. It was a church that willingly and enthusiastically supported a charismatic and authoritarian leader to safeguard their own worldview and place of privilege. So the International Bonhoeffer Society English Language Section Board of Directors released a statement of condemnation in the days after the events of January 6th. I helped write it. And in it, we cited an essay Bonhoeffer wrote in 1944, in which he declares that Christians, because of their unholy alliance with the state, have lost their ability to proclaim a life-giving word to the world. And so he writes, the words we used before must lose their power. We can be Christians today in only two ways, through prayer and in doing justice among human beings. So look, Dietrich Bonhoeffer was not an interfaith activist, but his denouncement of Christian nationalism, he swings the door open to a broad and inclusive view of human relationship and to an expansive idea of neighbor. He props that door open when he writes, for me, the main issue for individuals and for peoples is whether or not they have learned to live with other human beings and peoples. That's more important to me than all their ideas, thoughts, and convictions. Ironically, or beautifully, I find strong resonance between these words of Bonhoeffer and Eboo Patel's understanding of pluralism, which undergirds all his work as the founder and director of the Interfaith Youth Corps. Patel, a practicing Muslim, writes, 100 years ago, the great African-American scholar W.E.B. Du Bois famously said, the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. I believe that the 21st century will be shaped by the question of the faith line. On one side of the faith line are the religious totalitarians. Their conviction is that only one interpretation of one religion is a legitimate way of being, believing, and belonging on earth. Everyone else needs to be cowed or converted or condemned or killed. On the other side of the faith line are the religious pluralists, who hold that people believing in different creeds and belonging to different communities need to learn to live together. So my colleagues in the Augsburg Religion and Philosophy Department share the sensibility with me, the sensibility and commitment to teaching and learning how to learn to live together. More formally, we name it a commitment to interreligious competency. The theological resources fueling this commitment are Lutheran, a set of core Lutheran values that we have worked collectively to understand and articulate, namely epistemological humility, vocation, freedom, neighbor-centeredness, God's presence in creation, and what we call pursuing truth through a theology of the cross. I am hopeful that these 6 values might be fruitful in our interreligious conversation and conversations, as well as in our fight against Christian nationalism. And for the students and friends who have reached out to me in recent weeks looking for trusted resources in the midst of current confusion and chaos, these ideas might be of help. So first, epistemological humility. So epistemology has to do with what we know. It is a theory of knowledge. So epistemological humility is a recognition that we don't know everything. That is to say, given the limits of human knowledge, the Lutheran tradition recognizes that all truth claims and assertions of knowledge are inherently limited rather than absolute. This idea has incredible potential for challenging Christian dogmatists, or in Eboo Patel's language, any religious totalitarian, and for inviting engagement across difference. Second, vocation. Vocation is a concept central to the life of Augsburg University and many of the NECU folks who might be signed into the webinar today. In fact, my students roll their eyes a little bit when I mention the term because they hear it so often. Vocation is a lens for looking at and thinking about one's life and how it is lived out in the world. One is summoned by a call and we perceive that voice as coming from God or one's deepest self or from lived experience. The Lutheran tradition believes that vocation is unique to the individual, but that it is not only about the self. It involves identifying and responding to the needs of the community. And so this orientation to the community, the neighbor, is a thread that ties all 6 of these values together. Collectively, I'll talk about freedom, neighbor-centeredness, and God's presence in creation. Martin Luther's understanding of freedom is grounded in grace and faith. That is, on Luther's key claim that Christians are justified by grace through faith alone. After years of struggling with the idea of justification or being righteous in the eyes of God and worrying that one had to earn such righteousness through meritorious behavior, Luther concluded that justification is an unmerited gift of forgiveness and mercy. The idea of freedom is an understanding that freedom is freedom from these undue concerns, but more importantly, it is also freedom for service to the neighbor and creation. And so we can see neighbor-centeredness and God's presence in creation are paramount here. I'll skip to the last value. I have one more idea to offer here. The last of these 6 values is particularly Christian, and yet, or perhaps because of that, maybe the most poignant resource for calling out misplaced Christian allegiance and for engaging interfaith neighbors in this divided world. This value is the embrace of and pursuit of truth through a theology of the cross. Early in his career, Martin Luther described what he called a theology of the cross, calling his followers to see God in the pain of the cross, and to speak the truth about the realities of good and evil in the world. That included speaking truth to power. And it stands in contrast to what is known as a theology of glory, which incorrectly calls evil good and calls good evil. A theology of the cross can guide our work and conversations today by encouraging engagement with the complexities and brokenness of our world. In this way, a theology of the cross does not build a wall around the truth, but reinforces our commitment to epistemological humility and opens a door for deep and meaningful engagement with our interfaith neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Brandt. Thank you for reflecting on the historical context of recent events, but also giving us hope for a brighter direction deeply rooted in Christian tradition. We will now hear from our final panelist, Rabbi Arielle LeKach Rosenberg, who serves as an assistant rabbi at Shir Teqwa with a focus on music, prayer, and activism. She was ordained by the Rabbinical School of Hebrew College in June 2017. She spent her final 2 years of rabbinical school working as a full-time rabbinical fellow at the B'nai Jeshurun in New York City, where she developed innovative initiatives for people of all ages and backgrounds to deepen their relationship with prayer, music, and spiritual practice. I would love to attend one of your classes. Please welcome Rabbi Arielle LeKach Rosenberg.
Thank you so much, Farhan. It's such a joy to be in this company and to be in this conversation. Thank you so much to Augsburg and to Reverend Hansen for bringing us together. And thank you to my colleagues, Imam El-Amin and Professor Hale, for your inspired comments. I begin, L'Shem Yichud Kudsha Brichu Shchinte. May my words be in service of unifying the separations and the divisions in our people and in the divine. So the first thing I want you to know is that as I dig into Jewish text, Jewish textual tradition is multivocal. There's no communal consensus about what our text means. We call our canon Eitz Chaim, our tree of life. And our tradition is founded on Tanakh, which is the 5 books of Moses and prophetic writings and poetic writings like Ruth and the Song of Songs and Psalms. Tanakh is the foundation of our tradition, but responding to Torah, responding to Tanakh are thousands of years worth of commentary, responding to and reframing, reimagining Torah. Flowing from that tradition comes Talmud, a collection of rabbinic teachings compiled in the 7th century, and a thick multi-generational conversation of commentators from across the far-flung network of Jewish communities. Rabbis reimagining Torah in Spain and Egypt and Germany, across the globe, refracting the text through the questions and needs of their own times and community. Lo b'shamayim hi, we learn in a powerful piece of Talmud, the answers to our lives' questions are not written in heaven. Rather, it's our work to dig into our tradition, to listen deeply and allow our engagement to open new possibilities of interpretation, new ways of understanding our times and our tradition and ourselves. So we look to our text for inspiration and agitation. Our tradition makes claims not just on our brains, but on our bodies. So I want to take us on an exploration of one way to approach the question posed to today's panelists. How do we show up as neighbors in this time of division and hatred? What is demanded of us? What are our limits? We read in Leviticus 19, Lo tikom velo titor et b'nei amecha, ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against your neighbors. Love your neighbors as yourself. Ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha. Love your neighbor as yourself. This phrase comes as the seal on a litany of instructions of how humans should treat each other. Don't bear a grudge, don't revenge, don't overharvest your field, don't debase or degrade each other, don't stand idly by the spilling of blood. Ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha. Love your neighbor as yourself. A powerful statement that I want to offer as the foundation for my exploration today. A famous story from Talmud tells the following story. A person came before Rabbi Hillel and asked Hillel to teach them Torah while the person stood on one foot. And Hillel taught, that which is hateful to you, do not do to another. That's the entire Torah. The rest is interpretation. Now go and learn. In this story, Hillel paraphrases our verse, to love our neighbor, to treat each other the way that we would wish to be treated. This is all of Torah. That's all we need to know. The rest is commentary. But what does it mean to live by that rule? Go and learn, Hillel instructs the student, and through the student, all of us, to go figure it out. It's not enough to simply adopt this phrase as a credo. We have to dig deep to learn what is demanded of us and what we must ask of those around us to be able to live it out. The commentator Sforno, a 16th century Italian rabbi, taught on our verse, there follows a general all-inclusive rule, ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself, which teaches us to apply the same yardstick to our concern for our fellow that we would want applied to ourselves if we were in their shoes in a similar situation. This feels like an appropriate beginning to understand our verse. When constructing a society, a neighborhood, we must pay attention to the way that we would want to be treated in the classroom and the courtroom, in accessing healthcare and evaluating environmental impact when making decisions for our community, when discerning how to show up. But we've learned from human history that we are so good at saying, I'll look out for you. I'll treat you like I'd like to be treated. But those people over there, they don't count. Their problems don't touch me. And our commentators struggle with this. Who do we claim as neighbors? Sifra, a rabbinic companion to the book of Leviticus from the 5th century, begins with the proposition that ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, to love our neighbor as ourselves, should only be applied to affairs between Jews. But it continues undermining itself. Torah also teaches us we were strangers in the land of Egypt, and therefore our instruction should be expanded to include all people. Know the soul of the strangers, be implicated in their lives, for you yourselves were strangers in the land of Egypt. Extend our care and our concern to all people. In sitting with this commentary, I struggle with my ancestors' own challenge balancing the needs to care for themselves, for a subset of the whole, and to be concerned with all of humanity. There's so much at stake in defining who it is that I claim as my neighbor. And it raises all sorts of questions. Does it matter if my neighbor wishes me harm? Does it matter if my neighbor claims me as a neighbor? So I'm going to offer 2 reflections, somewhat contradictory, but that I believe can help us navigate our current moment. First, I urge us to claim the power of aspiring to love all humanity and all of creation through our actions. Rabbi Nachman of Bratlav, a Hasidic master and teacher of mysticism, taught that dispute makes it impossible to speak. Speech is possible through peace. It's therefore necessary for each person before we pray to accept upon ourselves the positive commandment, ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, to love our neighbor as ourselves, so that as a result of there being love and peace, we are then able to pray. The love and peace that Rabbi Nachman is referring to is an internal peace, a willingness to embrace and absorb all of creation, to blur the boundary between self and other. This, teaches Rabbi Nachman, is at the heart of making prayer possible. This should be our posture, reaching towards new possibilities. But in a world where white supremacists and white nationalists are not simply present, but active and armed, threatening our sacred spaces and feelings of safety in our homes and community. In a world where after hundreds of years of slavery and conquest, the United States has not made meaningful reparations to Black and Indigenous people. In a world where Breonna Taylor can be murdered while she sleeps by police in a no-knock raid and receive no justice. This posture of love cannot suffice. To live in community, we need to be able to ask, to demand that we heal, that we behave better, that we learn. I can love the entirety and complexity of creation, but still need the white nationalist who murdered community members in my uncle and aunt's synagogue in Pittsburgh to do tshuva, to transform his way of thinking to one that can include Jews, migrants, and leftists. I can yearn for a collectively held dignity that stretches over us like a shelter of peace, while being called to show up with a neighbor's mosque when a neighbor's mosque is bombed, and decrying publicly that act of violence and hatred. I can ground myself in prayer, imagining a thread of life connecting each of us in a glorious global web, but I can demand accountability before rushing to turn that hopeful, redemptive vision into legislation. We need community safety. We need accountability. We need equal access to resources. Neighbors must hear each other's needs and desires, recognize the validity of each other's visions. As we learn in a midrash contemplating our verse, in the place where harm has been done, we can only embody love when the offender asks to be pardoned and when the community comply with the offender's request. To truly become neighbors, we must recognize that harm has been done, and the offender must seek to heal the situation and then receive pardon. This is the heart of tshuva, a practice of transformation and making amends, which is at the core of Jewish life and practice. We do not seek to be perfect as neighbors. To be alive, to be a neighbor, is to cause harm, inadvertently or intentionally. But what makes us spiritual seekers and what helps us bring holiness in the world, what helps us show up for each other in this divided nation, is when we recognize that we have caused harm and seek to do things differently, by opening to forgiveness when healing is sought, by speaking out against harm done, by opening up to tochacha, loving rebuke, when we have fallen short, and seeking to transform our own beliefs and behaviors, by recognizing when it is time to forgive and embrace. We open ourselves to transformative, sustaining, courageous love as we move through these difficult times.
Thank you, Rabbi Arielle, for reminding us of the wisdom found in the greats who have taught us in the past, like Rabbi Hale, and that we should be loving our neighbors as ourselves. And thank you again to all of our panelists for your engaging remarks. There's so much more to unpack, and I hope this conversation continues offline. But now we will be hearing from two student respondents from Augsburg University's student body. Each will have 2 minutes to share a brief reflection on today's topic. And I'm excited to introduce both of them. I'll start with the first. We have Athena Estime, who is a junior at Augsburg with a major in studio art. She's from Minneapolis, Minnesota. She's an Interfaith scholar and a Phillips scholar, and she serves as a marketing officer for the Pan-African Student Union and as a peer advisor for the Stauman Center. Athena, we look forward to your comments.
Hi, thank you to all the panelists that spoke before me. I really appreciated your insights and your hearing from your experiences. Speak on the topic of unity and community. I feel as though that it's very important to really just learn one another. I think that's where we have the most challenge because, we're just trying to get through our regular lives. But when it comes to actually stepping back and taking time to learn another person, it can be extremely challenging because you just don't know why they're acting the way they're acting, why they respond the way they do, and it could be very frustrating. And when we don't have the patience to do that in the first place, it can be like very difficult to navigate through conflict and other problems as they arise. And so I really pride the people that I have seen in my life before me that go out of their way to connect with those in the community, especially here in Minneapolis. It's a very diverse place. I have a mother that has always connected with a variety of different kinds of people wherever we are, and that has inspired me to do the same. And I feel like everyone should do so as well to help springboard from other conflicts that do tend to come up. But what I took away from what everyone has said before me was that unity is very important, and to really just get through the uncomfortability of the times that we are in, we really have to understand what that word means, and as well as who our neighbors are. So thank you.
Thank you, Athena, for sharing those comments. And I can see why you're the Interfaith scholar on campus. We would now like to welcome Christian Nelson, who's a fourth-year student at Augsburg with a major in sociology and a minor in culture and social justice. He's from Fargo, North Dakota, and plans on looking for jobs related to criminal justice post-graduation. And he's an Interfaith scholar this year. So please join me in welcoming Christian.
Thank you, Farhan. As was expressed earlier, it seems like there are a lot of negative things going around in relation to our constant struggle with diversity, inclusion, and representation. But I'd just like to call attention to all of these amazing panelists for offering their unique perspective. I think these conversations are not easy to have, but I think they're necessary to have. And I believe the willingness to engage with these difficult questions says a lot. You know, what I heard was, what does it mean to be a good neighbor? How do we become a good neighbor? How do we unify to overcome division in our society? But these questions and these conversations are necessary to achieve healing, justice, peace, and mercy that we desire. And in conclusion, I'm very, very thankful that Augsburg and those in the surrounding communities have put such a great emphasis on these types of diverse and inclusive conversations. Thanks again to all the panelists.
Thank you, Christian, and appreciate your thoughts. And now, we turn to the audience. So I'm going to request Professor Matt Maruji, who will monitor the Q&A box and address any questions to the participants. And once again, thank you all for offering great remarks and reflections, and look forward to hearing from people online. Matt.
Thank you. Thank you, Farhan. So I just want to invite you to put your questions in the box, and I would be happy to address them to our panelists. And maybe to begin with, as we're waiting for those questions to come in, do any of the panelists have questions for one another, questions that came from what you heard your fellow panelists say? So we could start there, perhaps.
Well, I guess I would love to just hear both from Professor Hale and Imam El-Amin, where are the spaces that you feel like are really, that where interaction, where accountability, where relationships can really be built? Like Professor Hale, you spoke both internally about inside of Christian community, like where does accountability, where is that possible to create, and also across communities and between neighbors? Like where do we find each other in these difficult times?
Sure. Thanks for that question. And I just want to thank both you and Imam Makram for your amazing and insightful remarks. My first answer, the easy answer for me to your question is that some of this happens in my context in classrooms, right? So that the program, for example, that Professor Maruji is leading, that these students come from, this Interfaith Scholars program we have at Augsburg, has been a remarkable place. I was privileged to be part of it last year, for students from different faith traditions and non-religious or humanist points of view to come together and have really hard conversations. And I think the more that happens in educational settings, the more that can happen in communities as those students go out and become neighbors and community leaders and participate in, lived experiences. I wonder if, at least within the Christian community, there needs to be more intra-religious dialogue and more ecumenical work, because I think there are some echo chambers in different communities, and it's hard to get the conversations going. So in some ways, I think the interfaith dialogue model could be a good example for communities of the same ilk, if you will, but that don't always see eye to eye.
I would just add, I agree with the professor that I really agree with. I think that interfaith also in Islam is a space where we could have some opportunity to close these gaps a bit as well. I think there's a lot of different ideas that make for, I would think, internal conflict at times as well. But I also just think that on a real, just person-to-person level, just really being intentional about being in conversations. We participated in this project called the Story Corps Project with one of our interfaith partners, and it was just really designed to have people of different backgrounds, different traditions, to really spend an hour with one another in conversations, a couple of maybe prompting questions, but allowing it to really go organically. And I think that we've all appreciated this idea of really hearing, learning from, and engaging with the other. I think it starts in very, very basic, small things, and then it grows to larger movements.
Thank you. And there's kind of a question that came up in the question and answers that I think goes right along with what you're talking about. And the question was, are there particular examples of concrete work in your context where interfaith efforts are helping communities cross the divides we face? And I think, Imam, you were speaking to that. So I'm wondering if there's others of you, if Rabbi Arielle or if Professor Brandt Hale, if you have thoughts on that. And actually, Farhan, I thought also you might have something to say about this program you were talking about Muslim women and Jewish women that come together.
Sure. One of the pieces about the work that we do is we see some of the most challenging pieces happening across the country, but also projects that give us tremendous hope. And I think one of the projects looking at the Sisterhood of Salam Shalom is a great project. It started off as a grassroots project of bringing Muslim and Jewish women together, and then it took off and it's expanded across the nation and now globally, as I understand it. So I think the Multi-Faith Neighbors Network, I know one of the panelists mentioned EBU and the work that Interfaith Youth Corps is doing. I think these type of initiatives that really create and foster local relationships, but just have the ability to be scaled and take place nationwide. I think people are looking for the direction, for the structure sometimes, and for the leadership, for someone to step up and move them along.
In my experience, the role of universities and of seminaries has actually been really crucial for houses of worship in being able to engage in interfaith work, like being convened in this sort of conversation or meeting each other through sort of having a third-party convener has been really powerful. I would say that the Twin Cities, I came from New York City. The Twin Cities feels very small, but I'm always amazed by how many people I meet in those sort of intentionally convened interfaith spaces. Imam Makram and I met each other in exactly one of those spaces, and I feel like my life has been so much richer because of it. And it's amazing to me that our paths can be so deep and so narrow. And I think that this sort of space of intentional convening really creates new sorts of possibilities for us.
Of course, now the questions are rolling in really quickly as we have no time left. But let me end with one last one that maybe is a good way to end, and that would be to say, what do you think is the most important first step regarding beginning interfaith conversations in one's community? How do you begin that process?
I would offer quickly, I think it first should start with some introspection. I think it should start within your own self to take a moment to just get centered about what's important, what do you value, what are you desiring in this moment. We tend to find what we're looking for. We tend to find what we're intentional about, and I think that intentions are very important. But start with self. As a quick, we could expand so much, and I'd love to get the questions all in the question and answers so I can respond to them appropriately as well. That would be helpful to me. So I'll end with that.
Thank you.
And I would just add that I think in entering into interfaith relationship, to be really honest with yourself as an individual and as a community, what are you hoping to find there, right? What are your motivations entering that space and continuing to interrogate and be honest about that? I think that helps you stay as grounded and with as much integrity as possible. And I think there's also a lot of learning in doing that as a community.
Thank you also.
I would echo those sentiments as well. And I think, again, of my students who are entering into interfaith conversations for the first time, and sometimes it's scary. There's fear about what it might mean for how you think about your own commitments and your own thoughts and values. And so I appreciate the way Imam Makram started with saying, some introspection first, a little humility second, and then looking for shared experiences, looking for shared lived experiences that you can talk about conversationally. It's not about having to decide if you agree or disagree on every tenet or doctrine, but you can talk about what it was like to participate in a ritual, and maybe others have the same kind of experience, and you bring those conversations and those shared and different perspectives to the table, and that can open up beautiful conversation.
Thank you, and I invite Mark Hansen now to wrap up for us.
Wow, this was a marvelous hour, hard to draw to a close. But on behalf of Augsburg University, thanks to each of our panelists, Imam Makram, El-Amin, Professor Lori Brandt Hale, Rabbi Arielle, LeKach, Rosenberg, to our student respondents, Athena, Estime, and Christian Nelson, and to you, our moderator, Farhan Latif. Thank you so much. The video of this conversation will be available in a couple of days on the Augsburg University Campus Ministry YouTube site, so we hope you'll make use of it and share it with others. Augsburg University is also grateful for and committed to interreligious collaborative work being done with the 26 colleges and universities of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America who make up NECU. So we look forward to future opportunities for dialogue such as we've experienced today. It's my hope and prayer that this conversation will inspire and inform our being neighbors together in a divided nation. Thank each one of you for your participation, and may your evening hold time for peace and rest. Thank you.